Good morning. Let's try that with the microphone. Welcome to Morgan City, Utah. I'm Drew Clark. I'm the editor and publisher of Broadband Breakfast, and we are doing Broadband Breakfast live in person today. We are really pleased to have an exceptional group of people here in Morgan City, Utah, to tell the story. We're calling it a case study, right? How we can get better broadband. Our motto at Broadband Breakfast is better broadband, better lives. So we're wanting to know how we can get better broadband and better lives to rural America. And Morgan is a city. It is a city of less than 5,000 people. We are joined here from your left to right on our DS here with the mayor of Morgan City, Stephen Gale. Welcome to Broadband Breakfast, and thank you for your hospitality in letting us be in your city council chambers to do this special event of Broadband Breakfast Live Online. Next to Stephen Gale is Lynn Yoakum. Lynn is the fiber optics manager for the Utah Department of Transportation. And I sure hope we'll get to knowing how we can get other states to get someone like Lynn, because her role has just been incredible and invaluable in getting higher capacity broadband in parts of Utah. Skipping over myself, we are joined, thank you for being here with us, by Roger Timmerman. Roger's the executive director of UTOPIA Fiber, a guest on our program before, and really pleased to have Roger here with us. And then batting cleanup, last but not least, is Warren Woodward. Warren is the director of broadband service for X-Mission Internet, which is, I understand, the largest internet service provider that offers retail services on the UTOPIA network. And we're going to hear more from each of our wonderful panelists here today. I also want to remind people of the programming we have done and will be doing every week at 12 noon Eastern time, so 10 o'clock here Mountain Time out here in Utah. We do this program. We've been doing what we call the Summer of Broadband. We've had officials from the Utah State Broadband Office, the Indiana State Broadband Office. We're going to have other states in coming weeks, but for now we're taking a kind of a little look and case study, like I said earlier, of Morgan City, Utah. And I also want to give a shout out to all of the sponsors of Broadband Breakfast that make these programs possible. They include UTOPIA Fiber, Broadband.money, Broadband Now, Lightbox, Ookla, Pinpoint Capital Advisors, Google Fiber, Bitstream Communications Inc., Michael Baker International, Powerhouse Management, and Positron Access, plus Samsung and the California Emerging Technology Fund. We're really grateful for all of our sponsors that allow these programs to continue. So let's actually start with the beginning. And for the beginning for me, I'm going to have to turn to our panelists to flesh out more. I came here to Morgan City, Utah 3 years ago, and special shout out to Ty Bailey, the city manager, the person who does a lot of the day-to-day work for running the city. And Ty drove me around town in his pickup truck, and we went everywhere we could in this no stoplight city, right? And he showed me, okay, this is where the fiber drops are going to be. This is where, you know, we're planning to have this, and this was before the project had started, right? This was 2019, okay, before pandemic, before the project started, and this ended up being a feature in one of the feature stories of Broadband Communities, which is linked to this page for this event if you've had a chance to see it. So in some ways, this is a chance for me to come back to Morgan and go, okay, well, how's it worked out, right? How has this effort worked out? And let's start off with turning to the mayor here for a quick moment. Tell us just a little bit, Mayor, about Morgan City, what it's like. You've lived here for 60 years. Is that what you said to me earlier?
Since 66. So
okay.
That's up there.
Yeah, that's getting up there, 56 years. So tell us just a little bit about what Morgan is like and what it's been like over the years.
Well, Morgan's nestled on the east side of the Wasatch Front, beautiful valley, but we have a 3 square mile city with approximately 4,500 residents and a beautiful county. We have a I-84 going through, and we have railroad. We just counted close to 24 a day through the county. But I'd just like to shout out to Ty. He's on his 30th wedding anniversary, I believe he said. He's in Puerto Rico. And so I'm happy he's doing that. He lives, and this stuff is him. He's a very dynamic city manager. Also would like to give some credit to the previous mayor, Ray Little, who was bullish. He doesn't get pushed around.
Mm-hmm.
So let me just give you my experience. I'm not that technical, and I have Denise, our city recorder, who keeps me afloat, and so I'll get a little bit, maybe a little bit of scorn after the meeting. But anyway, what I want to say is where I live on the north side of Morgan, we just didn't have very good service, and so the towers and other things, and then we'd have to get amplifiers, and if I wanted to boot up, I'd have to go have breakfast first and then come back to it so I could get anything at all done. And then it seemed to overload for an amateur like me in no time at all.
Yeah.
So this is amazing. UTOPIA. I've talked to the city staff. I've talked to the county staff. Everybody is thrilled with it. It's clean. The one thing I want to say is the response time is amazing. They're right on it. And so Ty would want me to express that on his end of things, where he harbors a few complaints with if something's not going right, then he usually gets complaints that way. And just hope I can represent him well for what he did 3 years ago.
So Mayor, just tell us a little bit more about the city and what the community is like historically. Do people tend to work here? Do they tend to work in a neighboring city? In terms of like how important better broadband connectivity is to the future of your city.
Well, I'm still confident to say it's still a bedroom community.
Okay.
Most people commute to the other side of the Wasatch Front for employment, but the numbers of home businesses are rising rapidly. As far as the history of Morgan, I think you could call it a railroad community at one time when it first started. Horse and buggy railroad. It's got a great history. It's mainly been agricultural. And we are just one city in the county. So it's unique to that. So this is the hub of our whole county. And I can't tell you how many people comment about how UTOPIA has made it. Now, here in this city office, we're just now remodeling the basement to bring Weber County Health Department, Weber Human Services, who never could have done that without UTOPIA.
Mm-hmm. Now, so you're in which county?
Morgan.
In Morgan County. So Weber County is across the Wasatch Front, right? And just for our non-Utah viewers, the Wasatch Front is the main line of mountains here. And on the west side is where most of the cities are, from Ogden to Salt Lake to Lehigh to Provo and so forth. But we're on the other side of that mountain, right? And so it's not too far. There's a valley through. You can get to Ogden. A lot of people commute. But you're the hub of Morgan County. But why is Weber County offering services here in Morgan County?
Because we're too small to have our own health department. And rather than everybody having to go down now, they're going to be a sub outlet here in the basement, which is going to be much easier for those that need help from them. And it'll be a great service. So the history of Morgan is when the pioneers came through, they had to go over kind of northeast of us to get over to the Salt Lake Valley because they couldn't get through Weber Canyon. You couldn't even get a buggy through there. Now there's 4 lanes of interstate, two lines of trains. And so it's changed that
Yeah. Yeah.
immensely, but
Well, this is just a great point for our listeners. In a rural city, in a rural county, sometimes those counties don't even have the services. And so by partnering with the neighboring one through, it sounds like telehealth, through the opportunity to have these remote connections, you can achieve things you weren't able to achieve before.
well, I get comments all the time about how beautiful Morgan is and we'd like to move here and but now when they realize they can be top notch, they don't have to take a second place finish to anything with technology now is pretty immense to us. I know I talked to the city, I talked to the county, and every one of them is very, very thrilled about our speeds with internet.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're going to get to some specifics of this particular project just now, but let's hear from Lynn, because the Utah Department of Transportation's role has been really vital for this project, but for many others. So just tell us a little bit about what you do and why that is so important.
I work with the Utah Department of Transportation, and we are all about making our roads smart and helping travelers with information, because one of our main strategic goals is 0 fatalities. And that is a goal that we're always saying, a goal that we need to live with and strive to get, because 1 death on the roads is too much. And the smarter we make our roads, the better it's going to be for everyone, because we're going to reduce those fatalities. We're going to reduce traffic and congestion. And we also affect clean air with coordinating traffic signals. Down in the valley on the other side of the mountain, we have a big problem with that on the side
The
of
air
Morgan.
quality
It is.
can be very bad. On the north
And our air quality is better today than it was 10 years ago when our population is higher. So if you look at the coordination of traffic signals, that idle time that you put at when you're stopped in your car really causes a lot of pollution. And if you can get each traffic signal to move traffic to its optimal green. So most arrivals on green that we can do for each signal, and then the fewer stops through the main corridors. So I think if you look back over the last 3 to 4 years, you're going to watch that. You're going to probably be noticing that. And I notice it when I go out of state and they're not coordinated. And then I miss our Utah signals that are coordinated. We today have 95% statewide of all the traffic signals connected back into one system. That means county, state, cities all connect through one system through the fiber optics and our partnerships with the telecommunication companies. We connect about 100 through UTOPIA here. We've got about 100 traffic signals that we pass through the UTOPIA network back to our network at meet points with what we do. Morgan City is an interesting story, because we started with Morgan when we were doing a trade with a pipeline company that comes down the canyon. And they needed fiber optic transport. And we asked if we could put the fiber optics down within our right of way to be able to help us manage the interstate that runs through Morgan, and to be able to put up monitors, sensors, and signs that help with the traffic. 84 can be a bit.
Highway 84, Interstate 84.
Interstate 84 can be quite a bit of an issue in the winter with borders that close going up to the state. And this is actually a reroute for traffic when I-15 closes. This was the only route open when we had an incident where we had a high-speed chase, which was actually a low-speed chase coming all the way out of Lehigh, where they spiked the tires, but the car wouldn't stop and was going on rims, and watched it all the way through Salt Lake. And they get up here into Davis and they pit maneuver the car, of course, at the intersection where where 89 comes in, I-15 and Legacy. That whole right there, it shut down that whole section.
Right.
The only thing that moved was going up I-80 down 84 through Morgan at that time, and it was shut for a long time.
So then you're making a great point about all the intelligent transportation systems that UDOT has been doing and how important this is. And you've just mentioned some fiber swaps that you're responsible for. Can I just get clarity? Are these right of ways that both UDOT has, but also right of ways that others have that you're putting UDOT fiber in? Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that kind of takes us now, let's broaden out a little bit here to Roger Timmerman. And Roger, tell us just a little bit about what UTOPIA Fiber is and how you are able to serve a community more or less far away from your footprint as Morgan is.
Yeah, so just a quick background on UTOPIA. It's a consortium of cities that basically said, we don't have good broadband and we need something better. And they created UTOPIA. Initially, they just invited private companies to upgrade and provide the service. And it was kind of a last resort. They said, we just cannot throw enough money or incentive to get these companies to provide adequate service. But the city still didn't want to compete with them. And so that's where open access comes in. They said, we will band together, build a massive fiber to the home network throughout our communities, and then invite the private companies to come in and offer services on that. So rather than compete with these private companies, we encourage them and support them and like the competitive marketplace that creates. So we had these in the original 11 cities, but we are constantly getting bombarded by other cities who want that service. We had a little rough start, so we didn't get a lot of cities knocking on our door in the early years. But after 2009, all of our projects had been successful. And so we had kind of established this track record in cities. We're saying, well, can we now join in and benefit from this? A city like Morgan was a little bit of a barrier. We're like, well, certainly the demand from residents and the businesses is there, but how in the world are we going to get to you? Because we may have, a couple of $1 million of fiber to build within the city, but it may be that much and even more to build from our existing backbone out to the city. And so to finance a project and to get revenues and to cover that without any sort of subsidy or grant or anything like that is near impossible. Well, that's where, partnerships with others like UDOT come into play, where they, I think every opportunity they have, they're putting in conduit and fiber along the state highway systems and interstates. And so we look for those types of opportunities. And this one just kind of was there at the right place in the right location. We had fiber outside of the canyon, on the other side of the mountains.
Salt Lake side
and so we were able to put together a path that UDOT had and in trade, get the connectivity we needed to the city, so that all we had to really pay for out of pocket was the network within the city. And that we had a financial model that would work, where we would issue debt.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that just a second. Let's just hone in on it. So how, and again, I recognize we got a lot of people outside of Utah here watching. So we've talked about the I-84 corridor, which is the one that's going through the valley. Where is the right of way, or where is the backhaul that's bringing your signals from down in Salt Lake up to Wasatch, up to Morgan City? Like, where does it run along the highway? Is that where it is, Lynn?
Yeah,
It is. It's on the interstate, and it comes up I-15, crosses over. Today I was following along 89, and we have at I-15. We just finished last year the rest of 84 that connects to I-15, and it comes right up Interstate 84 to here. We leverage that right away to let UTOPIA in that right away with us, and then I get these traffic signals we were talking about.
So is this an actual fiber that
Yes.
that UDOT owns and controls?
Yes.
And then are you selling it or trading an IRU or?
We trade. We do a trade agreement, not an IRU.
Okay, and not an indivisible right of use, which is more of a property rights type. This is
Correct.
This is something that is contractual, that they give you access in other places. Is that right? And you
Correct.
give them. How do other states do this, Lynn? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you have Florida does this, Maryland does this. I've seen Georgia, Colorado. We're working. Arizona is just about ready to do this. New Mexico.
but many of these are modeled
Yeah.
after what you've done. So
Yes, they call it the Utah model,
Yeah.
and we work on that. And we started this we got a big push when the Olympics were in Utah.
Interesting. Into the 2002 Olympics.
And it started actually with the telecoms. The telecoms requested that we do this from the 1996 Telco Act.
Okay.
And they put the state legislation in process, which is Utah Code 727-108. And that legislation allowed us to do the trades, the open trades that we do. And it wasn't UDOT that put that in place. The telecoms came and say, we want access to this right away. So UDOT as a transportation, we weren't exactly excited about this trade at first. We were like, that's a closed access right away. And we don't know if we should be doing this. And they said, we want you to. And the legislature said, here it is.
Mhm.
And then we turned it to our benefit and it's worked out really good. Really, really good.
And when you say you turned it to your benefit, how have you been able to turn it to your benefit?
Well, with the trades right now, if you look at our trade balance, about 1/3 of our infrastructure is UDOT built.
Right.
And 2/3 right now is in partnership.
Got it.
So we've got like almost a 1 to 2 trade value coming back.
You're leveraging your assets.
We are.
to get twice as much as you would otherwise.
We've saved about $105 million so far
Mhm.
in trades. That's on the UDOT side. That's not calculating what Roger or one of our other telecoms would have done, would have traded.
And you'll trade with anyone, right? Utopia, of course, being a open access network, you're willing to trade with them, but you're also willing to trade with others. Is this a common thing for other carriers?
It is. And Morgan's actually a really good example of that because on that trade, you've also got another telecom called Beehive Telecommunications, and you have All West Communications as well. So Morgan is not just a one stop. It is actually a multiple providers.
Interesting.
And that's actually better for the business models within everything that you do if you can have multiple providers.
Well, and we invited Beehive Broadband to be with us here today. They just couldn't make it for conflicting reasons, but they are both a provider of internet services on the UTOPIA Fiber network like X Mission is, but they do have their own kind of ILAC I'm forgetting what the I stands for. Incumbent. How can I forget that? Incumbent local exchange carrier. They have many kind of services that they provide there. So Roger, let's go back to our narrative where we were. So UDOT helped you solve the backbone / middle mile problem. What other problems were there in getting the kind of broadband connectivity that the mayor has spoken about to Morgan City?
I mean, beyond that, it was kind of a logistics issue. Again, they're not right next to the other cities. And so we had to deal with, are we going to have technicians or can we get our contractors up here to do the work? Because the economy of scale is not the same as when you go in with a 50,000 household city. Here we were looking at about 1,500, 1,600 homes, population, what did you say, about 4,500? But that worked out fine. We're not that far away from our other operations in Layton and Centerville and Clearfield, West Point, Syracuse. We have a lot of other cities that are nearby. We're also supporting services for, you mentioned Weber County. Weber County is Ogden and those cities around there. And the
Right.
county itself, we provide them connectivity to their facilities.
Right.
Even in cities where we don't have fiber to the home networks. So we do have enough to kind of piggyback off of that it's not too bad here. But even with that, we've gone far more remote than that. I mean, we support networks in Montana and
Right.
Idaho and southern Utah as well. So we were able to figure that out. So we came in and we built the network. The city was very good to work with. They are their own power utility. And so that made the process of getting pole attachments and working through any pole replacements and easements, things like that, better.
Right.
And so we were able to get this thing built out very efficiently, and we didn't expect the demand that we got.
Well, let's go to that. In the article that I wrote 3 years ago that is linked again to the page for this event, I wrote that with continual growth in subscriber base and revenues, operating revenue at UTOPIA Fiber has been more than sufficient to cover the $125 million in new bonds. Now that's for, I don't know if
More collective
that's a
bonds.
collective, that's not what the Morgan City cost is. But that has allowed new connections in small communities such as Morgan and West Point, Utah, to get service, even when they needed UTOPIA Fiber to bring in the financing, even as other bigger cities were being built out. In the case of Morgan, 2.6 million. Okay, I don't know if this is still a good number. That's the number that of bonds is funded by UTOPIA Fiber, but the city guaranteed a 30% coverage, and the city would need to cover anything short if the subscribership didn't rise to 30%. Talk about that 30% number and why you needed that and where it is now.
So that's kind of the model that we use for partnering with cities. We basically say to go from nothing to a break-even scenario, it's going to cost some amount of money. In this city, it was $2.6 million. And to get the debt coverage covered, we would need about a 30% take rate of subscriptions. Now, what happens when more people sign up is it costs more. I mean, we've probably put in another $1 million into this network because
Ironically, you have higher costs because more people are going to subscribe. You got to build to that.
it's an excellent problem to have. But it's one that we do have, and we've ended up continuing, and in partnership with UTOPIA, we are able to do that. So we do general purpose financing to finance additional installations, expansion in those cities. They keep building more homes. For some people, for some reason, people like to move to communities that are beautiful and have ski resorts up the road and have ultra high speed internet. So, this is a very attractive place to live. And so they are building and growing pretty well here. So there's a cost to that, but the result is that we've gotten a lot more customers than we expected.
What is the take rate here in Morgan?
We're at about 62%.
62. This is twice what you needed. Is that right?
Yeah, and when you factor in the revenues from the businesses, we've done very, very well with the businesses because there aren't any other good options for them either. Our revenue is probably 2.5 times what we need to cover that debt. So it's a great place to be because we're covering the additional cost we've had of the network. We're covering the bond of the debt or the bond payments of that first phase. And then we're also now investing back into the community. We've been putting in some smart city applications. We're in process of installing a wildfire detection system like we've installed in Orem and Woodland Hills. We're in process of Orem, Layton, Murray, Woodland Hills. There's 4 of these up now. And so that's coming soon to the city. We've been upgrading the city facilities all over wherever they need a connection. And so we're kind of in this
You're in the virtuous cycle, basically.
yeah, a really exciting time when not just the residents and the businesses are benefiting, but we have all of these public benefits with these smart city applications. We have air quality sensors in now too.
Right. Well, we'll talk more about apps in just a moment. I want to broaden the conversation to get Warren in. Just final question 4, and maybe this can pivot over to Warren. I wrote in this story in 2019 that construction started in November of 2019 and will be completed by early 2020. Is that correct? When was it completed?
Sounds about right. We always put a little buffer in our schedules, so I think we completed a little early. But that's roughly accurate.
It's done. Whereas sometimes cities and communities and counties are waiting years and years and years.
Yeah, I joke, it's really easy to announce a new city project. It's really hard to complete projects.
Right.
You hear announcements all the time. And we're guilty of that too. UTOPIA has been going a long time, and it took us a long time to finish those original 11 cities. Technically, there's one little neighborhood we're wrapping up, but we were done with those and done with several of our new city partnership projects. And now pretty much everything we're doing at this point is in all new city partnerships.
Well, Warren, you're an essential part of this process, X-Mission, as a provider. Tell us just a little bit about what it's like to offer services to customers on an open access network like UTOPIA Fiber.
For X-Mission, this is our DNA. For 30 years, we've been providing, internet access to all corners of the state of Utah. In the early days, of course, that was just via dial-up. So a lot of people may perceive us as a Salt Lake City service provider because that's where our headquarters is and that's where our primary network is. But the reality is we've been serving all corners of Utah since day one. Of course, as dial-up fell off a little bit, not getting so many customers in, the remote corners of Utah. So partnerships with companies like UTOPIA help us, kind of re-expose ourselves back to those old markets that we used to serve regularly.
So dial-up, is getting to the point that it's so ancient, we almost need to introduce it, right?
Have like 6 dial-up subscribers still, believe it or not.
So
I don't know who they are and I don't know what they're doing, but they're there and they dial in every day.
by the way, I have to ask, what does the name mean? What is the
X-mission is just an
mean?
abbreviation for transmission. It
Uh-huh.
was just,
Okay.
I don't know, the idea of our
The idea
owner,
of
Pete Ashdown.
P dash down.
Yep.
So,
Maybe he started it in the closet.
and I understand you're the largest provider of services on the Utopia network. Is that right?
In terms of our footprint on Utopia, yeah.
Okay. So just again, let's talk a little bit more about what is it like for you to offer services on someone else's network? Do you feel like complaint that's often heard about open access servers? You don't have control over the process because there's someone else, namely Roger Timmerman here. And so how do you feel about that? What is it like to sell services on that kind of network?
Well, I can tell you that those complaints may be valid on other networks, but they're not on Utopia. They're by far our favorite partner. We've been working with Utopia since the earliest days of Utopia 2. And I think in many ways, a lot of what Utopia does in their relationship with the service providers has been partially guided by the relationships that we've had. You know, they always come to us with questions about what do we need? What kind of access do we need? What's going to help us improve our service? And they're always responsive to the ideas and the answers that we have. So I don't really have any trouble with that whatsoever. If anything, it just removes the burden of having to build those networks ourselves. We can let them handle what they do well and lets us do what we do well.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. I mean, we build these networks for the end users, but we also build them for service providers. If service providers aren't happy, then they're not going to be successful on our network. So there are a lot of things fundamentally in how we design and operate these networks. For example, we don't do any PON, right? There's no sharing. there's
PON
no
stands
splitters.
for passive optical networks.
Like everything is an active Ethernet connection, dedicated capacity. And so the service providers know they have their own connection to that end user. It's not sharing or time divided and split and shared with other providers, right? So, and we say, well, could we operate a functional network on PON? We could, but is that the preference for service providers? It is not. And so there's things where we maybe over-engineer it or build it to a higher standard so that we know that we're meeting the needs of our providers.
So Warren, does X-mission offer any, like Beehive Broadband, if they were here, they would say, oh yeah, we offer on Utopia network, but we also have our own footprint, so to speak. Does X-mission have any of that?
No, we do use other carriers for last mile and other capacities as well.
Okay.
But Utopia's become our largest partner over the years.
So what other types of carriers will you work with?
We use, I have to think about that. We have Comcast, Verizon, XO, CenturyLink, pretty much all of the biggies. We often lease point to point.
Is that for business or for residential?
That would be entirely for business. We don't
Business.
really have
Okay.
any
They don't
business.
let you use their network to sell to other
Well,
people.
they used to, and we were very successful back in those days, but
Right.
they of course kicked all the individual, third-party ISPs off the DSL network about 10, 15 years ago. So we don't do that anymore, but we do just, lease services from them for resale periodically.
Lynn, do you have any thoughts on this question of retail and wholesale open access? I know you're primarily on this kind of backhaul, but I just would be curious to see your observations on this.
Well, like with Roger's network, the traffic signals were possible because he is an active connection. Our network is also an active point to point. It's not a PON fiber optic network. And I thought that was a really good point to make, Roger. So it helps us be able to take those traffic signals just at that point to point with it. It also helps us be a neutral entity. We are neutral by law. We have to be neutral, and we cannot do preference. So if you have assets that can be traded to be able to help with the roads and with the state of Utah, then we can work together. If you don't, I have a top 10 list that you can go in and help us create in an area, and then that can help give you assets back for the trades.
Mayor, I know you're kind of in another line of work, so to speak, but what do you hear when you talk to people in your city? What do they say about the new service that you have available through Utopia Fiber and from an X-mission or a Beehive or any number of other providers? Because there are, how many providers do you have on Utopia Fiber?
It's hard to keep track. I think 15.
15
Maybe
for
16.
retail customers,
Yes.
and more for businesses, right?
Yeah, we're about 30 for business.
And when you've got those 16 retail providers, if they're on one part of your network, can they be on any part of the network?
Yeah.
So you suddenly now have 16, at least at a minimum, providers here. Just tell me how people in the community talk about that, Mayor.
So operating a business for several decades, one of the best things that can happen to a business owner is silence.
Silence, okay.
Uh,
By that you mean, why is silence good?
Well, because people are content and happy. A complaint is generally, well, my thoughts are content, happy customer is silent. And if an issue ever comes up or a conversation, say in the office, they'll say, oh, go here. That's where I go. But if they're unhappy, when they walk into the office, they make sure they vocalize that. And usually it goes to 10 people. So that's really good for your ears, is to not hear anything. But the comments are just, since I knew this was coming, as I kind of made some rounds, talked to the city people here and the county over in the building next door, and everybody's thrilled with how they can do business now. And part of the pollution, I was just thinking, part of the pollution problem is because there's lack of pollution problem is there's so many, I believe, networking from their home, aren't traveling in vehicles. And I hear that in any time the conversation's on, and right here in Morgan, there's just lots that don't go down through the canyon anymore. So if you have that ability, I have no idea how somebody can work from home. I don't know how I'd concentrate, but people do it.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more the thing.
Well, and one of the things that I chatted with Ty Bailey, the city manager, of course, who's not here today, but again, kudos to him for letting us do this here and have this discussion, and to Mayor for your being part of it. He said he was so grateful that they got this sort of done or in process before COVID hit, because COVID has really amplified the need to have high quality broadband working from home. What are some of your thoughts, Warren and Roger, on the kind of connections you need to kind of make it work in today's economy?
Well, I mean, broadband for, initially back in the dial-up days was, email and web pages, right? And then we got into kind of the phase of streaming where it became, Netflix and some video content, and that became the primary use. And then along comes COVID, and now it's, Zoom, and it's telemedicine, and it's gone from entertainment and information access to critical support of education, work, and lots, everyone in the household trying to do all of that at the same time.
Right.
So when COVID hit, we didn't really change anything on our side, but we went from about 200 installations a month to over 1,000 installations a month, not because we built a bunch of new things, but because people were suddenly in their homes and realized that cable and DSL and wireless were not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And they picked up the phone and called and signed up for fiber. And what we've seen is, now that COVID's waning, the impact of COVID, I don't know if the actual disease is waning. People are getting back to normal, but it's a new normal, and people are still working remotely, and they're still demanding more broadband. And we're not doing over 1,000 installs a month, but we're doing 600 or 700. Well above anywhere we were pre-COVID. So this is a new age, a new phase of broadband where people demand higher speeds and more reliability. I mean, when your broadband goes down or isn't working as expected, it's not the same as it was back in the dial-up era, because that happened all the time. Somebody pick up the phone and you drop.
Well, and the kind of connectivity you have on your network, is it gigabit down, gigabit up, or is it 10 gigabit down, 10 gigabit?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's everything we do on the residential side is symmetrical. So it's 250 meg symmetrical, gigabit symmetrical, or 10 gig symmetrical. And I think that's a big point. Even here in Morgan City has the fastest speeds broadband speeds in the country. I mean, you mentioned in the preview,
Yeah.
in Utah, and I'm like, Utah? No. This is the national leader, tied with other communities that offer a 10 gig residential service. And you say, well, is that really a thing? Say, no, we actually have 10 gig residential.
You have customers who do get,
paying
do they need to,
in this city.
what's the price difference between 10 gig, 1 gig? And
You're at
250?
about $200 a month, plus or minus. I mean, it varies on choice of provider. We're actually considering lowering that, but that's actually the lowest price point for
Yeah.
10 gig residential in the country. Most
Uh-huh.
others are $300 or plus. And what we're seeing is more and more employers are having their employees work remotely, and they're just saying, well, we'll pay for it. And people are used to paying those sorts of rates for Comcast, and are like, well, I can get the ultra premium UTOPIA service for that. I can get 10 gigs symmetrical dedicated to my house for $200 a month, or $230 or something. That's kind of the range. It's not our most popular offering. Our most popular is not the cheapest. It's actually that middle tier, the
The
gigabit
gigabit, yeah.
service. But the fact that a city like Morgan has that available today anywhere in the city, to both businesses and residents, and the businesses can actually go up to 100 gig. That's amazing. I mean, you'd expect those speeds in some, large city with tall buildings and all that. But no, Morgan City is a broadband leader nationally now as a result of this.
So, Pete, why don't you tell us a little bit more about, how COVID impacted sort of on your end, on the retail end of broadband subscriptions?
It was huge for us. I mean, we absolutely exploded during the COVID era as people began to understand the necessity of having a really solid home connection. I was going to bring up the exact same thing that Roger just did, which is that symmetry is really, really important. And it's one of the things that is most ignored in the current broadband market. And I can give you as a personal example where I live. I have one choice for a broadband provider, and it's Comcast. And I had, I think, 400 down on my Comcast, but it was 15 meg up, and that became the choke point. I had to upgrade to gigabit service just to get my upload speeds to 40. I don't really need a gig down, but I needed 40 up. And even that is barely sufficient for a household of 5 people, especially in the middle of COVID when they're all locked together using their devices all day, every day. That was our life. That was our connection to the outside world. We saw that reflected everywhere. People began to understand the importance of that and the necessity of that. And sales were really, really strong. And they've continued to be strong since, because even though people aren't using it as much as they were during the COVID, they learned to understand the importance of it and how it can be used and what they need moving forward, and to provide the opportunity to do things like work from home, which I personally also do about half the week. It's a really important distinction, I think.
Does X-Mission offer internet services on different technologies, i.e. fiber, coax, wireless, or just on fiber network?
We use a plethora of last mile deliveries, but by far our biggest focus on entirely on residential connectivity right now is UTOPIA. In terms of businesses, we have some wireless, some fixed wireless downtown. We use cable in some places. We use other companies' fiber in other places, and occasionally just optical Ethernet in the downtown. But generally speaking, for our residential project, it's pretty much all riding UTOPIA's network.
We've got a great audience participating and watching us. If you're on our Zoom, please feel free to ask questions. We've got about 15 minutes left, and we'll take as many questions as we can. I wanted to just kind of, let's go back to sort of the pre fiber era, or the pre UTOPIA Fiber open access era in Morgan City, which we don't have to go very, very far back. What was the situation like here, and what were some of the challenges, Roger and Lynn and Mayor, to addressing those challenges?
So I think I'd want to point out the public policy failure that existed, because if you go before UTOPIA in the city got involved in this, Morgan City was considered served, right? And this is a terrible joke to think that how bad the broadband situation was, and yet those federal standards for broadband, you had providers coming in and checking that box and marking this area as served and making this city ineligible for federal subsidies or any of these other programs, because you had a standard of 25 meg and 10 meg, on unserved and underserved. And so just didn't get any help financially. And yet the citizens here and their businesses were screaming for help. They recognized that what they had was insufficient. And what they had was, a combination of cable and DSL and wireless. And that's the case in all of the Utopia projects. Every city is, without Utopia, they're considered served by federal standards. You're like, this is a terrible joke. What a horrible failure of policy. And we continue to see that. They've moved the mark up a little bit.
Well, and the FCC has proposed changing the
They're
standard.
working on it, but even then, it doesn't go nearly so far. It's still asymmetrical. They want to get it up to 100 meg down and 20 meg up, and you're like, really? If it's copper or wireless, it's end of life. I mean, we really need to get past that. There isn't a copper or wireless solution that competes and delivers the reliability and speed of fiber. And any program that incentivizes or protects 30-year-old infrastructure that's end of life by these incumbent providers, that needs to be resolved. It's fiber and nothing for new investment.
So Roger, are you saying that people delivered 25/3 or they just claimed delivery of 25/3?
Some of both. I mean, I think you would have those who would say, I have 25 meg, at 3 a.m, but the standards don't say whether that's at peak hours when people actually use it, or whether that's at 3 a.m. So long as a provider was claiming 25 meg, that was served. And again, it's like, this is ridiculous that it's not consumer driven, it's not demand driven, it's provider self-reported data into maps that are horrible. And we're hoping for some revisions. And every effort to solve this then gets messed up by the lobbyists and protectionism from incumbent providers. Despite all of that, the successes of communities like Morgan and others that we've worked with are great examples that we don't need to wait around and depend on the federal government to solve our broadband issues. But I hope these use cases are helpful for trying to drive those standards and maybe making those programs helpful for future communities, especially those in the ultra rural areas that are out there clamoring for better broadband and yet are, marked off as served by some incumbent provider who's trying to protect their investment.
Well, of course, we haven't mentioned yet the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is the federal legislation that passed last November. And the rules have been out for 2 months now, where the program, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, has basically 2 different benchmarks. One is the unserved standard of 25 megabits per second down and 3 megabits per second up, and the underserved standard of 100 megabits per second down and 20 megabits per second up. And the Commerce Department has basically said that, hey, we're going to make sure everywhere gets the 100 megabits down, 20 megabits up. If we had that standard, Roger, where do you think Morgan City would
Well,
be?
again, that's a standard to protect incumbent providers because you have cable companies who meet that standard, right? Even though that's old, unreliable infrastructure that's already been paid for over 20 years of, sitting there and getting revenues. These programs start with good intentions, but the standards get set so low that they don't make any meaningful change. Everybody thought RDOF was going to finally be the program that solved broadband, or Connect America before that was going to be finally the program that's going to solve broadband needs. And yet this new one is going to have the same problem, and it's not going to move the needle dramatically, except for very small populations in the most extreme areas will see some investment, which is good. Those people do need better broadband, but you're going past major populations that are actually very frustrated with their broadband, seeking better solutions, and communities that are struggling to figure out how to make that happen. We can jump in and fit that niche or that need that's out there in some of those communities, but we're small and we can only do so much. And we need, these types of efforts across the country to jump in and help those communities. And we'd love federal government help financially, but these programs are fundamentally flawed because of bad broadband standards.
Warren, have you at X-Mission spent much or any time thinking about the IIJA and the way it offers support for underserved and unserved areas?
Not really very much. My job is kind of to chase the companies that are open access where they go and try to get on board them. So those sorts of things are a little outside my purview, but all of the changes that have been happening in the past year have been important enough. I mean, we're in an historic moment right now for broadband deployment. So it's gotten a little bit more of our attention than we've had in the past.
Yeah. What's your level of interest in deployments or markets outside of Utah or outside of the UTOPIA Fiber?
Well, I'm sure you're aware that UTOPIA has been hired to manage the new Yellowstone fiber
Yes.
network up in Bozeman, which we have been invited to come be a residential service provider on because they felt that their existing number of service providers maybe not have that focus, weren't bringing that expertise, and they felt that that was missing. So they invited us to join. And we're very excited about that project and looking forward to it as well. And of course, anywhere UTOPIA goes, we're willing to follow. We're anxious to follow if we can. But beyond that, I've looked at other service providers too. Lehigh City is opening up their own personal network or their own municipal network down there. We've been invited to participate on that. We're looking forward to participating on that as well. And I'm interested in some of the others that are happening around too. But we don't feel like we have any limits right now. We know where we've been successful, but we also know what we're good at. So if we can get on a network.
And what are you good at?
What's an open access residential and small business service provider in particular. We like to work more with some of the larger businesses as well, but we recognize that we resonate more with the residential and the small business. 30 years later, I really couldn't tell you exactly why that is, but we accept that that's what we do well. And so that's what we try to do. And anywhere where that network is provided for us, we know that we can shine. And we're looking forward to the option to start growing a little bit outside of the bounds of Utah.
Okay. Well, Lynn, I know that you've been thinking about Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. It may be for a slightly different reason, because in addition to the $42.5 billion that's devoted to the last mile broadband equity access and deployment program, there is a $1 billion middle mile program. Tell us a little bit about what UDOT is working on in that regard.
With the middle mile program with the IIJA, we're looking at trying to build those fiber rings that are also important on bringing resiliency and to be able to bring more than just one fiber line into a community, because when that fiber line gets cut, things go down, and then that community can be isolated. So down in our southern eastern section of Utah, we're looking at trying to get through Capitol Reef section area,
The
Lake
national
Powell,
park down there.
Bullfrog, the national parks, helping to connect back down in with the Navajo Nation and that section down there, creating those rings, partnering with Arizona, trying to come back up in through Page, and looking at other underserved communities and trying to help within those areas. And so I think UDOT plays a really important part with our right-of-ways to be able to facilitate and to be a neutral partner in trying to get down to those areas. It's resiliency is very important. I know with the IIJ Act, they like you to use resiliency.
Yeah.
It used to be called redundancy, and I think that confused a little bit for legislators.
What is resiliency?
Resiliency is really redundancy. It's more than one connection, but resiliency is more sexy. Okay. Resiliency is a sexier word than redundancy. Redundancy means, well, you've already got service. You don't need, why do you need a redundant connection? Well, if you don't have that ring, it's, you can't do that load balancing.
A fiber line that's cut somewhere is toast unless there's a ring where the circuits can just go the other way.
They can self-heal. And when one cuts, you don't know it's cut.
Yeah.
Because you stay up, and it really helps. I mean, how many of you been in businesses and it's like, hey, the fiber's cut? When all of a sudden you find out how many providers are going out one main trunk line out of the city, and every network strives for that resiliency. And the IIJA Act with Middle Mile has recognized that and said, you get points if you get resiliency.
Yeah. I can't resist asking just a little bit more about this Utah model of sharing fiber through rights of way. How did you come across this idea? Again, you have given a little bit of background on the Olympics and the act, but as you've developed this, what have been some of the insights you've developed, and how have other states started to adopt that model a little bit more?
Well, with the Olympics, they could not get a carrier to put in a fiber connection to the traffic cameras so that we could watch from Park City all the way down into Salt Lake City and across the Wasatch Front. So we're like, hey, we're redoing the road. Let's put in the conduit and fiber optics. And after the Olympics, there was about 600 miles that have been put in between going from Provo all the way up to Ogden. And they had the leveraging law. And it was like, okay, I was working with America Fork City, and we had a company named Centracom that came through and said, can you help us on your railroad right away? I had negotiated right of ways on a railroad backbone with Union Pacific, and it came up into Salt Lake, and that was going to allow the telcos to bypass the main carrier central offices and get to downtown Salt Lake without another stop and without another toll.
Mhm.
And that was able to bring everybody in. So UDOT was like, hey, we need this connectivity up SR6. We can trade. So we allowed the trade for SR6 to be able to come up into downtown Salt Lake and to continue that build from the railroad all the way on I-15 and to be able to come into that existing conduit. Everything was set up with Utah law. Then they hired me from America Fork City to
Okay.
come up and manage with UDOT to be able to handle the trades. They liked what they saw when I did the trade with America Fork and with Centracom. And then we were also trading with UTOPIA at that time on that same backbone section. And UDOT kept fibers on that backbone section. So that 288 that was originally put in is carrying a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's carrying a lot of phone providers.
What's the next city down the road, Mayor? What, like, if we kept going on 84, I-84, I grant you, you're the only city you said in the county, but like the next county over, what's the next one down the road, so to speak?
It'd have to be South Weber, just at the mouth of the canyon.
Okay.
And then if you continue down, you'd hit Riverdale.
You're going back towards the canyon. I'm saying going the other way.
Oh, the other way?
Yeah.
Hannaford?
So what's it going to take to get the next city, right? That's kind of where I'm going, is like, we've been looking at Morgan for this hour as a case study for getting broadband out to rural communities. How do we get it to Hannaford, or how do we, just, and let's kind of use this as an opportunity for everyone to offer their final thoughts on what we can learn from what you've been able to do here, Mayor, in Morgan City, with the help of these partners. How can we make sure more and more parts of rural America get this kind of high capacity broadband?
I think you're at the Devil's Slide Wholesome Cement Plant, correct?
No, so we stop here in Morgan. UDOT, I think, may have the path, or
We have a partnership with All West that goes past the Devil's Slide and into Hannaford, and I believe Hannaford is served with All West right now
Okay.
with the fiber. And you're also watching down below you come in at is it Green? What is it?
Mountain Green.
Mountain Green up to the ski resort, hooking over into Huntsville.
Huntsville, Liberty.
We go down the canyon there at Huntsville and Ogden Canyon and creating that. So the backbone, I don't know if the mayor wants to know this, but we were in Morgan by 2010. That we were in almost 10 years ago at this section here. We didn't think about providing to the city. It was all for traffic until your predecessor, the mayor,
Little.
Mayor Little calls me on the phone and goes, I hear you have fiber on the interstate. And I'm like, yes. Can we get a provider here? And it's like, I'll ask around. so
know some people.
So we started asking to see what was available. And I believe that was the first time that Beehive came up, but it was a little bit maybe problematic. It was a bit of an older infrastructure you had through town. They had a fiber optic backhaul with us, but it wasn't quite getting the fiber out to the home. And I believe that's when you did an RFP that went out to be able to increase that service, because Morgan did fall under that problem of, yes, we're served. And so
Quote unquote
served, but they weren't qualifying for all that funding that was able to come in. And so I believe that UTOPIA build-out model really helped with that for Morgan. And I believe, you've had some of your businesses connected to the fiber that they did probably back 2012. is when some of those connections came in, was when we first.
So,
did
so
that.
something you just said here, Lynn, is it took the mayor of this city
Mhm.
calling someone to know that there was something there, to call someone, and then connections happen. So Mayor, let's get your closing thoughts on our topic of the day, and how can we kind of replicate what you've done here elsewhere, and then let's hear from everyone and close out.
Well, I think Mayor Little's very instrumental in getting the ball rolling. I think our city manager, Ty Bailey, is just amazing. Really beyond his time to get it moving. And I think that what I'd just like to say is that it's made it possible to be able to expand a lot of help to different people, situations, businesses. Where one of the biggest conversations is that if we get a traffic light, I'm moving. Because we like the small fill, but yet the small fill so close to the Wasatch front is, we need the technology. We need to be able to move around that way.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank
I'd
you.
just like to thank you for coming and thank you for pushing it through. And we really appreciate it.
Thank
Helped
you.
us immensely.
Thank you, Mayor. Go ahead. And
We'll help you manage that traffic light. We'll
If it
connect
comes.
it.
If
We'll
it
connect
comes.
it to fiber. We'll connect it to fiber. It'll be good. So don't worries there. Helping leverage and seeing the communities connect. It was very satisfying to watch Roger come into my own community to be able to help connect on that one, and sitting there one day working from home and watching the fiber line come up, and all of a sudden I was out with my camera going, Roger, the fiber is in our town now. It's very exciting. That upload download speeds, very important for communities. Don't settle for anything less, guys. Really push and ask that for your community. I had an engineer sit across the table from me and tell me that grandma does not need upload and download symmetrical, and neither does 90% of the population. And I go, well, then maybe I'm that other 10% that I really need that symmetrical. But my grandmothers wouldn't even be satisfied with what I've got right now. So thank you. And I thank you for your conversations on Broadband Breakfast. And I hope other communities out there can team with their Department of Transportation, help you with middle mile, help with those right-of-ways, and help get your communities connected.
Wonderful. Roger.
I just emphasize that it's not any one entity. I think this is a great group. I'm glad you pulled this together, because it does demonstrate that it requires this sort of partnership, with the city, with your other public agencies. You've got the UDOT, UTOPIA, both public entities. You've got private sector service providers, all with a critical role coming together to cooperate to bring this sort of success story to Morgan. From Utopia's perspective, we love what we've done here in Morgan. We want to do lots more of these. We have lots of other cities in the queue and conversations. And if you're a city out there looking for a solution, reach out. If you're, reach out to your mayor, reach out to your county, reach out to your state. Anyone you have available to you. If you're in the region of Utah, Idaho, Montana, Arizona, New Mexico,
Reach out to you.
Colorado, California, that's our,
Right.
kind of our region of we were expecting quite a bit of growth there. But yeah, it's an exciting time and glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Roger. Warren, you get the last word.
Sure. Let me take a moment to advocate for the consumer here. If there's one thing I have heard, is that Morgan went through a series of attempts to get high-speed connectivity. And the one thing that all of those failed attempts had in common is that they were all single provider too. And so even had they been successful, the customer then would have had to choose whomever it was that actually bothered to put that into their room. What we have now with UTOPIA and with the other open access networks, of course, is you get a networking terminal installed. And when that port is lit up, you have 16 service providers immediately available for you to choose from. And that's from, tiny little startups to, well-established providers such as ourselves, and they're free to pick and choose. And if you think that internet is a commodity and who your service provider is doesn't make a difference, I encourage you to experiment and find out. Other than that, I just want to also point out that I think it's amazing that Morgan, a city that doesn't have a street light, has the same internet connectivity that Zion's Bank has in downtown Salt Lake City. It's just kind of an incredible thing, and I'm really pleased to be a part of it.
Well, what a wonderful discussion. What a great thought for us to end. On behalf of Mayor Steve Gale, Lynn Yocum of UDOT, Utah Department of Transportation, Roger Timmerman of UTOPIA Fiber, and Warren Woodward of X Mission, I'm Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. We'll see you next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.